Good afternoon. Hello, hello, hello. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome to all of you to our 16th policy orientation for the Texas legislature. It seems like yesterday and it's a little scary that I have been up here at all 16. But I am so grateful that all of you are here. My name, of course, is Brooke Rollins. I have had the incredible honor of leading this organization for the last 16 years, and we're so grateful that you're here. I say this almost every time that we open a new policy orientation, but it's worth saying again. When we did our very first 16 Januaries ago, although it's February this year, it's our first time to do it in February, but 16 years ago, it was a very different Texas, and it was a very different America, and it was a very different TPPF. Back then, you could have fit our entire staff in a little Yugo. You could have found our offices right next to, we were in an old art gallery. There were just three of us right on Brazos in 4th. We had maybe a few dozen legislators who may be willing to meet us in the back room of the McDonald's. And every now and then we would go to the Capitol and try to walk around and have some meetings. But the times have changed. From 3 employees to now almost 100 who are not just in Austin, our new office in Washington, D.C., taking Texas to D.C., my friends, and scattered around the country as we work in key states to take the Texas model to the rest of the country. But back then, 16 years ago, like in original Texas, we had an improbable vision, grounded in liberty and determined to see it through. Unlike then, we didn't have to fight Santa Anna, but then and a little bit today, our opponents have been the proponents of big government and the friends of the status quo. We engaged then as we engage now on the battlefield as happy warriors. That January 1st, 2003, when I walked in the door as the newly minted president and CEO, which some of you heard me say was very strange because there were only 3 employees, and I guess I got to be 2, the president and CEO, to today with a sound enterprise with branches and personnel literally across the country. This organization, along with so many of you who have walked along with us, has risen to a level and is a beacon of liberty, and we are so very grateful for all that you have done to make that so. The original Texans won our freedom, but now it is our job to sustain it. Yet all this is not necessarily the most important thing. While TPPF in Texas has done well, and we have together done great things, and I'm so proud of it and our colleagues and our board and of all of you who have supported that, but that is not really why we do this. We do it for the men and the women and the children who are not in this room. We do it for the ordinary people with ordinary lives who deserve to live in liberty. We do it for the working men and women who deserve to live with opportunity. And we do it for the entrepreneurs, the creators, and the innovators who deserve a shot at prosperity. But most of all, we do it for the next generation, the children across Texas and across our beautiful America who dream big dreams for themselves and their futures. Thank you for being here with us at the beginning of what promises to be an awesome 3 days.
You and I have within ourselves the God-given right and the ability to determine our own destiny. But freedom is never more than 1 generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. The only way they can inherit the freedom we have known is if we fight for it, protect it, defend it, and then hand it to them with the well-taught lessons of how they in their lifetime must do the same.
The idea that freedom is worth fighting for and worth sacrificing is what's driven this country for 200 plus years, and it's what's driven this organization for years.
Freedom has always driven mankind. I mean, it's something in the soul of man.
if we don't fight to keep what we have, we're going to lose it. That's just the pattern of history.
The Battle of San Jacinto and the men that fought for the freedom of this country is just, it's an incredible gift. And every day I get up and I feel like I need to do what they did, and I don't feel like I do.
So I look at the Battle of the Alamo and I look at the Battle of San Jacinto where Texas freedom was won, and I think, man, we've got it so easy. All we have to do is give up our time. And those men had to give up their life.
For me, Texas is our home, and we care about preserving the freedom that I've grown up with for our kids and for our grandkids. And I don't think anyone articulates it better than the Texas Public Policy Foundation.
We were able, with our very capable legislative allies, to pass the most comprehensive set of civil justice reforms in the country. And the Texas Public Policy Foundation was by our side the entire time.
They're more than watchdogs. They are looking out for the practices and the policies that are right for the people of Texas.
There has never been a time in Texas or in our country where the need for strong, principled leadership was more evident.
We focus on issues that are important to Texans, but also important to Americans.
I think the return on investment, if I look at what I give to Texas Public Policy Foundation, the return on that investment is much more significant than most every other investment that I make.
TPPF has played a pivotal role in the success of Texas and our ability to achieve freedom.
I don't see dollar for dollar a better investment in getting that message out in Texas today.
We're not fighting Santa Ana today, we're fighting federal bureaucrats and school boards and teachers unions and college administrators, but it's absolutely the same fight every day.
But I'd like to ask each of you what it is you value so highly that you are willing to fight and possibly die for. We will call that Texas.
You know, it seems like yesterday that we were standing in, well, I think we were over at a different hotel, but basically the same sort of room, having the same discussions, and it was on the cusp of what 2017 could look like, with a new White House and a new administration and a new Secretary of Energy and a new cabinet, with a focus that we all had hoped would move this country in the direction that Texas has modeled now for so long. And what a year it has been. It is just in every respect. And today you'll get to hear from two of the architects, really two men whose shoulders we stand upon, who, while we were working in Texas, they were actually working in D.C. and around the country to try to move to where we find ourselves today, which is extraordinary economic growth. For every, I think I heard Steve Moore say, but I've read this as well, the promise was for every new regulation, 2 would go away. Well, what's happening in D.C. is for every new regulation in the last year, 22 have gone away. That the EPA, it's amazing, that the Environmental Protection Agency, which is 3 full city blocks of bureaucrats who are working to basically shut down what makes this country great, that agency will be half of what it is at the beginning of this year by the time this administration finishes its first term. To think about the consequences for all of us sitting in this room, but much more importantly, for those who are back home working paycheck to paycheck to try to feed and raise and support their family and achieve the American dream. thank you all for being a part of that and how great it has been. And again, our speakers today will talk more about that. I really want to introduce, before I turn it over to our first speaker, my great friend Steve Moore, the legislators who are here, because in all the talk about what we have done in Texas and how we have accomplished great things, none of it would have happened without the men and the women who go to work every day, every other year especially, but they're here all the time working for this state, and those are our legislators. Senator Larry Taylor was at the very first policy orientation 16 years ago, and he has not missed a single one. I love you, Larry Taylor. Our wonderful legislators, House members Doc Anderson, Briscoe Kane, Phil King, Drew Springer, Bill Zedler, who also was at the very first one, and hasn't missed one since, Drew Darby, and Terry Wilson. Thank you all for spending your time coming to Austin and being with us today. Please rise and be recognized. You know, it is no accident that in President Trump's first inaugural address earlier last year, that he said he was giving power back to you, the people. In Texas, we reminded America of the real source of democratic legitimacy and strength in our great country. In Washington, D.C., at long last, they are listening. Today, I have the great privilege of welcoming, as I said, two of the architects of that future that we are now living, who have labored tirelessly in their fields in the nation's capital, even as we forged ahead in our own. Steve Moore and former United States Senator Jim DeMint. First, Steve Moore, who has also had his share of policy orientations through the years. Ronald Reagan was, of course, called the great communicator, and often we talk about the importance of communicating our ideas and winning the hearts and the minds of the people who are working and live in this country every day. This is really the foundational insight and really into the life and career of my good friend Steve Moore. When you look across his 4 decades of labor in liberty's defense, you come across the same themes again and again. First, that liberty is an indispensable key to prosperity. And second, that the inescapable task is to persuade Americans of that case. And that's why Steve Moore has done what he has done. That's why he served at both the Heritage Foundation and the Cato Institute as an economist. That's why he served as a senior economist for the Joint Economic Committee of the United States Congress. That's why he founded the Club for Growth, one of the most consequential advocacy and policy organizations in modern history. That's why he founded the Free Enterprise Fund, which moved the action in the public square to new heights. And that's why he served on the editorial board of the Wall Street Journal and continues as a contributing editor of National Review. Steve Moore, like Lincoln and like Reagan, has always understood that public sentiment is everything and has conducted his career in that light. And the continuing vitality and influence of the argument for free markets and free people is a testament to that. Please help me welcome current CNN contributor and a senior fellow at the Heritage Foundation, Steve Moore.
Is this a national asset or what? Brooke Rollins is one of the great leaders running the best state think tank in America, and that's saying a lot because we have something like 65 great state conservative think tanks, and Brooke really has broke the mold. And I'm so glad that you're not only now influencing what's happening in the great state of Texas here in Austin, but also, you know, your impact is now being felt really in a big way in Washington, D.C. You know, when I used to talk to Donald Trump with my buddy Larry Kudlow, you all know Larry Kudlow, the great economist, and we were working together with Trump, and he'd always say, what do we need to do to turn around the American economy? How do we get us on a faster growth path? And I would say, Donald, it's very easy. Just make America look more like Texas, and that will cause a lot more growth. And boy, do you do it right, Brooke. And so congratulations on the great growth of TPPF. I think I was there from the very, very beginning, and to see the explosive growth. And look, this is about policy impact, and boy, have you done that. Now, every year I do a report for ALEC, which is a group of state legislators with great Arthur Laffer, and we rank the states in terms of which states are doing it right and which states are doing it wrong. And of course, as you can imagine, California, New York, and New Jersey and Illinois are at the very bottom of the pack. The politicians in there just don't have their tray tables in the upright position when it comes to economics. But Brooke, I'll give you a sneak preview this year. We rank Texas number 4, so congratulations. You've moved up from 12 to 4. But I hate to tell you this, but Tennessee and Utah, North Dakota are still a little bit ahead of you. What do you have to do to get number 1? Get control of your property taxes here in Texas, and you will become the number 1 state in the country. So I hope you will make that a priority. Okay. Brooke just asked me to talk for a very, very brief time because you're in for a real treat and treasure. You'll be hearing, I'm the warm-up act for the great, great Senator Jim DeMint, who is just a mentor of mine, and I love that man, and it's so great to share the stage with him. I wanted to just make one overall point to you in terms of what we all do, why we're here, why we come to these events, why the Texas Public Policy Foundation and the Heritage Foundation and other groups exist. And it is to change America and to allow our ideas, our conservative free market ideas, prevail and work. And I think what we've seen in the last year and a half or so has been an amazing affirmation of the fact that our ideas work and theirs don't. Right? And so let me just kind of walk you through a little bit about what's going on in Washington and the tremendous change. And I'm very proud of this. I mean, I worked with Donald Trump during the campaign with Larry Kudlow as his senior economic advisor. So we helped put together a lot of the agenda. And I'm quite proud of how our ideas really work. And in some ways, Brooke, the really cool thing is these ideas and these policies have actually in some ways worked better than we even thought that they would. So that's a pretty cool thing. I was walking down the street just the other day. I was in New York, and this lady, she just ran up to me. She was Hispanic. I think she said she was in Guatemala. And she ran up to me. She put her arms around me. She was so excited. And she said, "Are you the guy on CNN?" I am, by the way. I am with fake news now. I apologize that. But, and she said, "I just want to tell you," she said, "thanks to the Trump tax cut, I got a $1,000 bonus from my employer." I mean, that's pretty amazing. Now, Nancy Pelosi may think that that's crumbs, but for people who are earning $50,000 or $60,000 or $70,000 a year, $1,000 or $1,500 or $2,000 additional bonuses or pay raises make a real difference in people's lives. And so let me kind of walk through some of the things that we've accomplished with the help of TPPF and our whole movement. And it really does start with the tax cut. This is an amazing achievement. We cut our corporate tax rate from 40%, the highest in the world, down to 21%. We've gone from worst to first in terms of our business tax rate, which is an amazing accomplishment. I never thought we would get to 21%, but we did. That is starting to bring, the other thing we did, of course, was the repatriation of the capital. So we cut the tax rate to 10% on all of these companies like General Electric and Boeing and Apple and Microsoft that have trillions of dollars that are sitting in bank accounts in Ireland or Canada or China and these other countries. And we basically said, bring it back to the United States and we'll charge you a 10% tax and you reinvest it here in America. And boy, has that worked. I mean, you saw the story with Apple. Apple brought back $350 billion to the United States. That's $350 billion. The United States government is going to collect $39 billion of tax revenue, so it's just free money to the U.S. Treasury. And ladies and gentlemen, Apple has basically just announced last week they're opening up a new factory with 20,000 new American workers. I mean, these are amazing statistics that have, and it reverberates. There are now 150 major companies that have announced pay raise bonuses or benefit increases for their workers. And we estimate, you can go to Americans for Tax Reform website, and they're documenting these announcements by companies. Their latest count, 4.1 million American workers are getting bonuses and pay raises because of the tax cut. That's an astounding number. I mean, the tax cut's only been in existence for 6 weeks, so that's great. I know most of you, many of you in this room, how many of you in this room own or operate a small business? I think probably at least half of the people in this room. We are lowering your tax rate from 40% to 30% under this tax bill. Donald Trump always said, I want this tax bill to be for the 26 million small business in America. If you run a small business, as many, if not most of you in this room do, you know you're the spinal cord of the American economy, so we wanted to make sure that happened. And then there are all other jewels in this tax bill. I mean, we basically, I don't know how many of you know this, we kind of kept it secret. For the first time in 35 years, we have allowed drilling in Anwar up in Alaska. I mean, that's a pretty great conservative accomplishment. And on top of that, Brooke, I mean, just to create the grand slam, we finally eliminated the unfair tax on lower middle-class Americans by eliminating the individual mandate tax under Obamacare. So that's a huge, huge win. We're letting people out of Obamacare to get health care plans that they can afford and that they want. So we did that. That's had a huge, huge impact already. I mean, if you look at the stock market, even with the fall, by the way, I just looked about 5 minutes ago, the Dow is back over 25,000. So, you know, that little mini correction, I think, is over. But even at 25,000, we have seen since the day Donald Trump was elected president, a $6.5 trillion increase in wealth. That's an incredible amount of money that has been generated by the policies of Trump. Now let's talk about some of the other things that he's done, because the tax cut is a fairly obvious victory. But I want to talk about a couple of other things. Number one, on the regulatory front, because I've always believed, and I know TPPF has provided a lot of the great research for this, is that the one thing that is really strangling American businesses more than just about anything is the tentacles of regulation that are surrounding the necks of American small businesses. And they were out of control under Barack Obama. You know, by the way, every time I talk about the triumph of the economy so far, because I am on CNN, usually it's about three liberals and me, they all say, this economic growth and this economic recovery that we're seeing right now is the Obama effect. And you know what I say to that? Yes, this is the Obama effect. It's the effect that Barack Obama is no longer president of the United States. But if you look at some of these regulatory changes, first of all, the people that Donald Trump has put in these regulatory agencies are fantastic. Scott Pruitt, who is the head of the EPA, has done an amazing job of rebuilding our energy industry and our coal industry. If you look at what's happening in all these agencies, we have replaced anti-business people with pro-business people, and that's had a huge, huge impact. So you know these statistics. If you heard the State of the Union and you heard Donald Trump talk about this, but it's something to be mighty proud of. Donald Trump promised that during the campaign that for every new regulation, an agency would have to get to 2. He lied about that because we haven't replaced 2 regulations with every new regulations. We've repealed 22 regulations for every new regulation that has been put in place. I mean, that's an amazing accomplishment. And then third, something that is important to you all in the great, great state of Texas is what is happening with American energy. Let's face it, the previous administration was very hostile to the fossil fuel industry and did everything they could to try to stop Texas and Oklahoma and North Dakota and Alaska and other states from producing our energy. Donald Trump is pro-American oil, he's pro-American natural gas, and he is pro-coal. And that's an important change. And so I don't know how many of you saw the story in the Wall Street Journal 4 or 5 days ago. It was kind of buried in the B section of the newspaper, but it's an amazing story. That at the end of 2018, the Energy Department now believes, for the first time in 40 years, the United States of America, this great, 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 great country of ours, will surpass Saudi Arabia in oil and gas production. I mean, that's a pretty amazing, amazing development. And a lot of that oil and gas is coming from Midland, Texas, and the great state of Texas. So that's an awesome story. One or two other quick things I will say. You know, when you think about our conservative agenda, it is amazing how many of these ideas that Donald Trump has really picked up and run with. And I'll just give you another example. Donald Trump wants to take about $5 billion from the worthless U.S. Department of Education, and he wants to put that money straight in the pockets, directly in the pockets of American families. 80 to 90% will be blacks and Hispanic families in low incomes, and allow those families to pick the school of their choice. And I just think that is one of the most important things we could do. The other thing that Trump wants to do, and I think he got a lot of these ideas from Texas. You know, when I talk about the clouds on the horizon, I think one of the big worries that businesses are talking about now is finding the workers that they need. to fill the positions. I don't know how many of you looked at the jobs report that came out on Friday, but it was an amazing report. Not only did we create more than 200,000 plus private sector jobs, which is a great number, but did you see this? You probably didn't see it because it wasn't announced by the media, but wages for middle-class average workers went up in 2017 faster than they have gone up in 12 years. You want to talk about delivering a punch right for the American middle-class families. This was what we wanted to do. This is what it's all about. We didn't want to help rich people. Rich people do have a lot of money. What we wanted to do was allow middle-class families that are struggling, that are financially strained out, stressed out after the last 10 years, give them a pay raise. The average middle-class family until 2017 had not had a pay raise in 15 years. The fact that we saw this big increase in wages, I thought, was a phenomenal result. But one other one that you may not have caught. The Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta, which monitors the progress of the American economy every week, and now we're only 5 weeks into the new year, but they are tracking these numbers, and they put out a report just the other day that said, based on what has happened so far this year, they believe the economic growth rate, hold on to your hats, in the first quarter of 2018, 5.4%. We have not had 5.4% in 20 years in this country, so that is an amazing development. And what it shows, and I'll end on this point, is the triumph of ideas. You know, I've been working on this stuff for 30 years, Brooke, I think a little less you have, and it shows that when our ideas prevail, it makes Texas better, it makes every state better, it makes America great, and we are going to see, let me just end on this. We're just getting started, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to see the biggest American comeback you ever saw. Thank you very much for all that you do to make TPPF possible.
I love it. I said, I'm glad you're at CNN because we need to get this message out to people who don't normally hear it. So good for you, Steve. Thank you for taking one for the team on that. It is now my great privilege to introduce Senator DeMint and something you may not have known. In tiny little Saluda County, South Carolina, there is a road sign you see when you drive in on the main highway, and it reads very simply, Texas starts here, South Carolina. It all goes back to Texas, Jim DeMint, in case you didn't know. Saluda County, South Carolina, is the birthplace of Alamo heroes William Barrett Travis and James Bonham. And the people of Saluda County know that the spirit carried to the Alamo by Travis and Bonham was uniquely South Carolinian, and that it forms an essential element of the inheritance that constitutes the Texas spirit. Today, we have the great privilege of welcoming another South Carolinian, another man willing to fight and sacrifice for freedom, to Texas. I want to say just a few words about how transformational and important the life and work of Jim DeMint is for us, for Texas, and for this great country. He entered Congress in 1999 as a member of a party that wasn't quite sure what it stood for. The intersection of the Clinton years with the so-called compassionate conservative era meant a Republican Party that too often confused big government for morality. There was a real sense in Washington, D.C. then that the true proof of humanity and good governance both was a willingness to spend other people's money. Almost fatally, the supposedly conservative party had forgotten what it was supposed to stand for in 1999. But Jim DeMint didn't forget. Over the next several years, he stood, sometimes alone, for the principles that he and his party were supposed to defend. When Ted Kennedy and George W. Bush formulated No Child Left Behind, Jim DeMint worked to transform it from an intrusive federal program into an empowering state block grant. When Medicare Part D burdened Americans with an expensive new entitlement, Jim DeMint led a small and principled band of legislators against it. When Social Security entered one of its periodic actuarial crises, Jim DeMint labored to transform it into a system that retirees could control for themselves. But perhaps most courageous from a political standpoint, when the powerful textile interests in his home state of South Carolina stood against free trade, Jim DeMint defied them and stood strong for the benefits of trade and commerce for all Americans. You never wondered where Jim DeMint stood. All you had to do was look for liberty, and he would be there. But his record didn't stop there, and I think this is really important. After ascending to the United States Senate in 2005, he realized that changing policy also meant changing personnel. This is where I think Jim DeMint's most enduring and consequential work has been done. He did two things that deserve gratitude and respect of all of us here today. First, he aligned himself with and therefore legitimized and endorsed the nascent Tea Party movement. The validation of a populist uprising of the American people by a United States senator was a powerful thing. Unlike so many of his peers who feared the people, Jim DeMint remembered that the people are in charge. Second, he established the Senate Conservatives Fund, an organization dedicated to identifying, supporting, and endorsing viable conservative candidates in United States Senate races across the country. While the official party organization busied itself with support of incumbent and establishment figures, the Senate Conservatives Fund sought out and elevated real conservatives to high office, often to the dismay of many. And it is thanks in no small part to Jim DeMint that we now have United States Senators Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio, Mike Lee, Rand Paul, and Ron Johnson. It's hard to imagine a Senate and an America without those younger leaders. Thank you. But this is the importance of Jim DeMint. He reminded his party what an office holder should be and do. He transformed the Senate and therefore America. He continues to lead today in civil society, first at the Heritage Foundation and now at Citizens for Self-Government. He is a principled patriot, a friend, and a warrior for liberty, and I could not be more proud than to welcome him for the first time to the stage of this event. Please help me welcome Senator Jim DeMint.
Thank you. Now, I'm just looking to where they hid the speech here. Okay. Brooke, I think that was the best introduction I've ever had. I need to get a copy of that. Thank you. Yeah, a lot of times people just read the bio off the internet and it goes a little bit long. But, well, someone from South Carolina is back to try to save Texas again. That's why I'm here today. Hopefully I have a little better outcome than the last folks who walked over here to do that. But no, it is great to be with you. And I love the crowd we've got. I know there are a lot of supporters of Texas public policy here today. I know we've got some state legislators. Thank you for your service. And I can tell you, while it may not be as glamorous as serving in Congress, which is really not as glamorous as it's portrayed, the real action is at the state level. And I appreciate what all of you do, and I know there's some legislative staff here today. I appreciate you. I know we've got some Republicans and Democrats, and if you hear me criticizing Democrats today, which I will, I consider the Democrats that I meet around the country at the state level very different than Washington. The dynamic's totally different. The control of really both parties is different in Washington, and I find on a lot of the issues that we work on with state legislators, Democrats are working with us in a very constructive way. There's very little of that left in Washington, but while I'm critical of Democrats, if you've listened to me any in the past, I'm usually more critical of Republicans because they pretend sometimes in Washington to be something they're not. But thanks for the chance to talk to you a little bit about how I see the country and the states. And really what I'm here to talk to you about is to tell you why states must lead the nation and why Texas must lead the states and why Texas Public Policy Foundation must lead Texas. I want to put all that together today, and I'll start again at the national level. And I think Steve portrayed this well, and Steve, it's so great to be with you. When I first ran for Congress over 20 years ago, he was already leading the Club for Growth at the time. And we modeled Senate Conservatives Fund after a lot of the things that he did and continue to work closely with him. So he's been in the arena a long time, helping to elect good people, helping them once they get there. I've modeled some of that after something I'm doing now in Washington. But Steve, thank you. And he and I were working 2 years ago, meeting with House and Senate leaders on the tax bill, trying to get them to develop some consensus so that whoever the new administration was could push in the right direction. And while probably neither one of us will ever get much credit for that, I know we were there trying to make things happen. And Steve, you did do a lot to change things. And isn't it fun to see Americans winning again? I mean, isn't it just fun to... I mean, you could tell it when Steve was talking, but a year ago I thought winning again was just an audacious campaign pledge, you know? It sounded like it. But now it's real. And it reminds me of the miners coming out of a mine after being trapped underground for 3 weeks. They can't believe they're free and the sunlight's almost too bright. As I go around America, it's just people almost don't know what to do with themselves as things look better. Because a lot of what was America for so long, for 8 years, all the American ingenuity and entrepreneurship and initiative and prosperity were trapped in a cave of unpredictable regulations and high taxes and political scorn. I mean, for a long time. You know, our borders have been wide open to drug traffickers and illegal workers and gangs and terrorists. Adversaries and critics around the world have used us like a punching bag while continuing to receive billions of dollars of aid from American taxpayers. Our enemies on the battlefield have run roughshod over our military because we have been hogtied by rules of engagement designed to guarantee defeat. And the mainstream media has controlled the narrative and reigned unchallenged as they tried to convince Americans that the disaster of the Obama years was actually progress. All this has changed in 1 year. And as we've seen here in Texas over the years and in many states around the country, conservative principles have delivered the results that conservatives have always promised to the American people. We do see the economy growing. We see more jobs. We see regulations open up energy to the point where we're now an energy exporter. We've seen our military do in really a few months what we're supposedly trying to do for you. We've basically taken all the territory that ISIS took in Iran, Iraq, and Syria. I mean, they did what they knew they could do if we took the shackles off of them. But it's been even more fun to watch how the left has responded to the success of President Trump and his conservative policies. How many of you watched the President's State of the Union address? Well, I tell you, it was so much fun. Again, watching the Democrats, it was as fun to watch them as it was the president. You know, Nancy Pelosi looked like she was chewing some kind of sour tobacco or something, didn't she? Or maybe it was one of those little Tide Pods that some of the kids eat. Whatever it wasn't good. And Chuck Schumer, he looked his usual sinister self, but his heartburn was clearly a lot worse than it usually was, just looking at his face there. But the television coverage of the State of the Union revealed a lot about the true motives of the left. They didn't clap about the news of all the new jobs that were created or the higher wages. You know, the members of the Congressional Black Caucus didn't stand up and clap when Trump announced the lowest unemployment among African Americans in history. The Hispanic members of Congress just sat stone-faced when Trump reported the highest levels of job and employment for Hispanics ever recorded. You know, the Democrats even sat on their hands when Trump agreed to give amnesty to nearly 2 million immigrants, which is what they had been asking for. And they especially didn't like, I think they hated it, when he said, Americans are dreamers too. Progress and prosperity for all Americans is not what the left want. That undermines their whole strategy. They need victims. They need voters who believe they're part of a disadvantaged group and that only big government can save them from the unfairness and equity of a free society. They really don't want us to be Americans. They want us to be hyphenated Americans. When President Trump announces that 90% of Americans will have more take-home pay, this threatens the whole paradigm of the left. If voters ever figure out that conservative policies help everyone, that capitalism lifts more people out of poverty than any government program, that more education choices mean more opportunities for everyone, especially the poor, that more freedom in the workplace and less forced unionization leads to better jobs and higher wages, that lower taxes and less regulations lead to lower prices for consumers and more jobs for workers and a better environment. If voters ever know the truth about what makes their life better, the left, George Soros, and a lot of the Democrat progressive machine will be out of business. I think all of us are here today to help make that happen. I know I left the Senate early so I could do more to make it happen. After working for 14 years as a congressman and a senator, I came to the realization that conservatives would continue to lose ground on the inside of government until we did more to develop public opinion and public support on the outside. And even though I went to work for a national policy organization, my conviction was that the solutions would have to begin at the state level. When most senators hang up their spurs, I figured you guys would understand that in Texas. They give their campaign funds to a university to house their records and perhaps name a library after them. There's not going to be one named after me. I gave away most of my campaign funds in 2010 and 2012 to help elect more conservative senators. And as Brooks said, I started the Senate Conservatives Fund to help elect more people to drain the swamp. I think Ted Cruz will tell you we did some good with that. But I still had $600,000 left in my campaign account when I left the Senate. I gave half to the State Policy Network, and the other half I used to start a state policy organization in South Carolina, modeled after TPP. It's called the Palmetto Promise Institute. Because I believe then, and I still believe now, that the only way to save America is for the states to lead. Think about it. Ben Franklin told us after the Constitutional Convention, after the delegates signed the Constitution, that we have a republic if we can keep it. There is no such thing as a republic with an all-powerful central government. I Googled republic just to see what would pop up. And believe it or not, even Yahoo got it right here. Listen to this. A federal republic is a federation of states with a republican form of government. A federation is composed of a number of self-governing states united by a federal government. In a federation, unlike a unitary state, the self-governing status of autonomous regions is constitutionally entrenched and cannot be revoked by a unilateral decision of the central government. How many times has the self-governing status of Texas and all other states been violated by a unilateral decision of our central government? Thousands of times. By judges, by Congress, by presidents, by regulators. There is no longer any such thing as enumerated or limited powers, because there is nothing off limits for the federal government. The 10th Amendment has been gutted. Probably most of you know that's the last of the Bill of Rights. It says whatever the federal government's not given the power to do in this Constitution is left to the states and the people. I can't think of anything now that the federal government does not believe that it has authority over. And the Commerce Clause was designed simply to allow the federal government to make sure trade worked between states without tariffs and all of those other things. But the Commerce Clause has been perverted by the courts to give the federal government license to regulate everything, all parts of our lives, education, health care, whatever. The education of our children, retirement, roads and bridges, whatever. Folks, this is why I'm so grateful for Texas, your legislature, your governor, and Texas Public Policy Foundation for supporting a convention of states to rein in the power of the federal government. Texas Public Policy not only helped pass the resolution in Texas to call for a convention, but they're leading other states to do the same thing. So, Brooke, thank you and your team here at TPP for making that happen. And we are making progress all over the country. Back to Washington for a minute. When Obama was reelected in 2012, I realized conservatives had to do something dramatically different to make sure that the 2016 presidential election had a better outcome. I left the Senate and took with me my best policy people, the best experts on the Hill, the best communications people I had, and we've been working with a number of conservative groups and leaders at the state and the federal level. We worked for 4 years getting ready for the 2016 campaign. We trained candidates, we developed detailed policy recommendations for every federal agency, composed a list of thousands of potential appointees to staff a conservative administration, to work with the Federalist Society to create a list of conservative judges, and Neil Gorsuch was on that list, and we personally handed it to candidate Trump before the election. We saw some of the impact of what we were doing to try to unite the movement and get them on the same page in 2014 when Republicans had one of their best national elections in history. We provided candidate briefings and training for over 200 Senate, House, and state-level candidates. The guy who ran that is with me here today. Sean, where are you? Are you in the audience? Did you get anything to eat? Oh, he must be outside making fun. Oh, Sean McMahon's over there. But at least 10 of the Republicans competing for the nomination came in for briefings and information about policy and how to set up a Republican government. When Donald Trump won the nomination, we were able to load his transition team with conservatives and influence his choices for cabinet secretaries. This all had to be done before we knew a Republican would be elected or even which the nominee would be. We put a big bet on the come there. All this may appear to be national policy or national strategy, but most of the success of 2016 was a result of years of cultivation of conservative ideas by policy organizations at the state level. Thank you. The taxes, for instance, we've just been able to see what happens to states that have low taxes, states that have high taxes, states that have no taxes, and versus the ones that have, again, the higher taxes. We've seen it's been a demonstration project, so we knew what it would do to the economy, and we were right. So we had the right people in on his transition team, had a lot of influence in getting people like Scott Pruitt and Rick Perry on the team. They've got a good team around them there. So we encouraged candidate Trump to talk a lot about federalism because conservative policies depend on devolving money and power out of Washington and back to the states. This will never happen if we wait on Washington to take the initiative. The federal government will never willingly give up its power unless the states and the people demand it. And the states will never demand it unless state legislators have the constant pressure and support from well-funded, independent, conservative, research-based policy organizations like Texas Public Policy Foundation. States are the key to America's success, but many states have not yet captured the vision of their role in a Republican government. Texas and the Texas Public Policy Foundation are helping to change that. In fact, Texas has been leading for years. In the 1990s, Texas was one of the early right-to-work states. This was one of the first projects of TPP, one of their first initiatives. Texas quickly became one of the fastest-growing states after they became a right-to-work state. Over half of the states are now right-to-work, following that example. Even Michigan, the birthplace of unions, is now a right-to-work state. But this took 2 decades of work by the Mackinac Center in Michigan, the nation's largest state policy organization. I think they're still larger than, they're not anymore? Second largest then, okay. And it required an understanding of how to achieve political success. Joseph Overton, an early leader at Mackinac, developed the idea of the Overton window. This is a little in the weeds here, but it makes sense. It's also known as the window of discourse. This window is the range of ideas tolerated in public discourse. The range of public attitude determines what ideas are politically viable. The Overton range of public discourse goes from unthinkable to radical to acceptable to sensible to popular to policy. Politicians will not address ideas, even good ideas, that are considered unthinkable or radical by the public. If they do, they won't be in office very long. Right to work in Michigan is a good example of how the Overton window works, and a good example of how states can lead the nation. For years, the unions in Michigan and around the country have conditioned union workers to believe that right to work is an unthinkable and radical idea that will hurt them. This made consideration of the idea in Michigan impossible. But after a lot of message testing, the folks at Mackinac realized that they could make the same idea sensible and popular if they learned to talk about it in a different way. Right to work became freedom in the workplace, and after a few $1 million in advertising, the idea not only became politically viable, it became policy. Texas public policy was an innovator with right to work, and Texas set an example for the nation. Mackinac helped improve on that idea, and now freedom in the workplace is becoming politically viable in more states. All it will take is a few more states to adopt the idea before it can become politically viable in Washington as a national policy. It's not viable now. I can say that with certainty because I helped lead the national right to work effort in Congress for 14 years. No Democrat in Washington, especially in the Senate, can stay in office if they cross the unions. Even some Republicans oppose national right to work, but not for the same reasons as the unions. I remember one Republican senator from Tennessee telling me he was going to kill the bill because he wanted Tennessee to keep its right to work advantage over Kentucky. The heck with the good of the country there. My point is this: it's almost impossible to move national public opinion in a conservative political direction all at once, especially when you consider the national liberal media, Hollywood, the wealthy leftist socialists like George Soros, the powerful government unions, and all the special interests on K Street in Washington that benefit from central power. There is very little in Washington pushing in the right direction. The only way that common sense conservative ideas of limited government and federalism, personal responsibility, education choices, and traditional values will prevail is if they're cultivated from the ground up by the states and by the people. States are the proving ground for good ideas, and sooner or later, the facts will win the day, even in politics. It's taken a while, but the benefits of ideas like freedom in the workplace are undeniable. For the last 25 years, nearly 25 years, from 1990 to 2014, 8 of the top 10 states for job growth have been right-to-work states. 9 of the bottom 10 were forced union states. And now, after Michigan went right to work in 2013, all of the bottom 10 are forced union states. You can't ignore this kind of information for very long. And there are a few more examples here from Texas I just want to mention. Free market competition for electricity, something Texas public policy worked on years ago to deregulate. Most of the states in the whole country now have copied what has been done for the benefit of the states and the people who live there. Regulatory relief for fracking. You know, Texas has taken a light touch for regulation, approaching fracking, and unlike states like Maryland and New York and Vermont, the difference in the economies are obvious there, and now that has helped the whole United States become an exporter of energy. Fiscal responsibility. TPP in Texas, they've led the way on pension reform. You've taken bold steps to ensure the state pension plans are actuarially sound. Other states are following your example, and those that aren't will be in Washington asking for a bailout within the next decade because a lot of states are going broke. Medical malpractice, which was mentioned earlier, really made Texas one of the best places in the country to practice medicine, and it's helped create some of the best medical centers in the world right here. Criminal justice reform, which I'm working on with TPP nationally, started here in Texas in 2007. Instead of building 17,000 new beds in jails, Texas created alternatives to incarceration, such as drug courts and mental health treatment. You made a huge difference. As more states follow the lead of Texas, ideas that now seem radical and impossible in Washington will become increasingly popular. And as states demonstrate their ability to manage issues more effectively than the federal government, devolving power and money out of Washington becomes more viable. That's the good news. I want to hit on the bad news just for a second before I close. The bad news is Texas is not leading on one of the most important issues facing America today, and that's education. With the large Hispanic population in your schools today, Texas voters will look very different demographically in 10 years. We only have a short period of time to convince all Texans that conservative governance will make their lives better, and that begins with better education. Actually, it was the Goldwater Center in Arizona who led the way on what we call education savings accounts today. Education savings accounts have proved to be the best practice for more education opportunity in 5 states already. Contrary to the claims of the left, ESAs help minorities, the poor, and at-risk children. And the research shows that public schools perform better when there's more education choices. The education savings account idea, it creates publicly funded accounts that gives parents the option to send their children to a private school, to pay tutors, to support homeschool programs, or send their children to schools that specialize in services for children with disabilities or children with extraordinary abilities. Whatever is not spent in one year rolls over to the next year. And if parents are smart shoppers, there will be money left over for college. Empowering parents with funds to spend on education services of their choices will encourage innovation and entrepreneurship in education and attract billions of new investment into the field of education. With ESAs, every school is a public school, and every education service is available to all parents. The Texas Public Policy Foundation is leading the effort to make Texas the largest state with universal education savings accounts, and I fully expect Texas to soon be leading the nation with this idea. If we can make this happen in Texas, Washington politicians will be forced to stop pretending that more national education plans and regulations are necessary. Thank you. As for me, I'm staying in the fight. I'm continuing to fight for conservative reforms on several fronts. I've started a new organization in Washington called the Conservative Partnership Institute. And the conservative leaders who helped me shape the policies and messaging over the last few years and to select the appointments for the Trump administration are now leading the Conservative Partnership in Washington. Our mission is to equip, train, and unify conservatives on Capitol Hill, to make them more effective by creating a support system, a counterbalance to the swamp. Everyone asks what happens to conservatives after they're elected to Congress. What happens is there's little support in Washington for doing the right thing. There's no reward for doing the right thing once you're on the inside. In August, we'll open a new Conservative Partnership Center 2 blocks from the Capitol, where members of Congress and their staff can meet, talk about what they want to get done, how they want to get it done, and work together. I'll be a part of helping to facilitate that. The center will have offices and meeting space for many conservative groups who will be there to support the congressmen and the senators and their staff. We've reserved some offices for Texas Public Policy Foundation and the State Policy Network, hoping that they'll be part of the team because our policies are basically state policies. And the whole idea of federalism doesn't work unless there's states ready to take it when we send it back home. And that's what Texas Public Policy and policy groups all across the country are doing. I'm also working on another front. I'm working all across the country with state legislators, along with Tom Coburn and a number of other people, to encourage states to call for a convention, an amendments convention, to restore the original limits on our Constitution. I'm going to keep trying in Washington, but I can tell you with certainty that they're never going to stop spending until we bankrupt the country. With Republicans in charge of everything, we'll have $1 trillion deficit this year. And they're talking about spending more with the big deal they're making right now while we speak. The states have to step up and do what our founders expected them to do, is rein in the power of the federal government. Friends, we have a wonderful country, and many have sacrificed to give us the privilege and the blessing to call ourselves Americans. But America is strong because it was built and must be maintained from the ground up. We are a republic, and the states must, as our founders intended, lead. States must lead the nation, Texas must lead the states, and Texas Public Policy Foundation will continue to lead Texas. All of you here today are helping to make that possible. Thank you so much for the support of Texas Public Policy, because what you do here helps us in every other state, and it helps us in Washington. I cannot conclude without giving a shout out to my good friend J.B. Horton, who I've worked with for years, probably one of the finest people I've ever worked with. He's now leading the development effort here at Texas Public Policy. I can't imagine a better person to help Brooke and her team raise the resources necessary to help Texas save America. I hope all of you will double your contributions just to make J.B. look like a hero, if you would. Thank you. God bless Texas, and God bless America. Thank you, bro.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Senator DeMint, and thank you, Steve Moore, and thank both of you for being here. It is just awesome to have your expertise. Clint is going to kill me because I know we're a couple minutes behind, but I want to say one quick thing. Where is JB? Stand up so everyone can see you. I was not going to do this, but I think it is worth, since Senator DeMint did it. JB is our newest team member at the Texas Public Policy Foundation and had an incredible career at the Heritage Foundation, of course, the sort of the granddaddy that Senator DeMint worked at as well, and had an amazing run there, raised a lot of resources, but decided that, if I can put words in your mouth, that the real fight, as Senator DeMint said, is in the states. And so what an honor. Now, I did stalk him, terrorize him, beat him over the head for 3 years trying to get him to come work for Texas rather than the Heritage Foundation, but I finally won, and he is now here, and what an honor to have him. So thank you, JB. All right, y'all have an awesome afternoon. Tomorrow morning is Senator Graham, Phil Graham, and Kent Hance. And for those of you that were here 3 years ago hearing their storytelling, by the way, I said, would y'all like me to moderate your discussion? And they said, oh, no, we just want to do it ourselves. The back and forth between two of the architects, probably the two main architects of the Reagan Revolution 3 years ago, was one of the greatest things I've ever witnessed. They'll be back tomorrow morning with their show, but talking about Trump year one versus Reagan year one, and you will not want to miss it. So we'll see you in the morning. Have a great afternoon at the panels, and thank you all again for being here.